How my husband cut ties with his toxic family. I always knew my relationship with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law wasn't going to be easy. From the moment I met James's family, there were subtle signs that things would be difficult. My sister-in-law, Maya, was an overbearing presence in her son's life, and her expectations were always high. She expected things to go her way and often tried to manipulate situations to her benefit. It wasn't that I didn't try to get along with her, but every attempt to build a relationship felt like walking on eggshells. My sister-in-law, on the other hand, was always distant, but relied heavily on her mother, making her own decisions based on what Maya thought was best. James and I had been married for a few years, and while we were both trying to build our own life, his family's influence was like a looming shadow, especially when it came to family gatherings or life decisions. James was caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace. But there was a constant sense of tension. His family was constantly overstepping boundaries, whether it was making unsolicited decisions about our lives or subtly pushing their opinions on us. I had hoped things would improve over time, but they only seemed to worsen. As the years went on, it became clear that they didn't respect our space or our choices as a couple. It was a challenge I wasn't prepared for, and yet I found myself fighting a battle that felt impossible to win. We had just bought our first house, a milestone we had worked hard for, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my mother-in-law. She said she needed to talk to me and James about something important. It was the beginning of a conversation that would change everything. She said that Maya and her family were struggling and that they needed a place to stay. I didn't think much of it at first, but when she insisted that we give up our house to accommodate them, I was floored. The idea of letting Maya, her jobless partner, and their children move in felt not just unreasonable, but completely disrespectful to the life James and I had worked so hard to build. The moment she made that request, I knew things had gone too far. The first question that came to mind was why they thought we should give up everything to support them. But more importantly, I couldn't understand how my husband's family could be so entitled. Why didn't they see how wrong it was to ask us to sacrifice our home for them? The request came completely out of the blue. My mother-in-law didn't even try to soften the blow. She was blunt about her expectations. She said Maya, her daughter, was pregnant again, and because Maya and her partner couldn't manage the finances to support their growing family, they needed a bigger place. The solution, according to my mother-in-law, was simple. Maya and her family would move in with us. She went on to say how it made sense because we had a larger home, and Maya's family couldn't fit into her smaller house. I remember feeling the blood rush to my face, not just from the shock of the request, but also from the audacity with which it was made. What really upset me was the complete disregard for our lives, our plans, and our hard-earned success. James and I had just started settling into our new home, a place that symbolized our independence and the future we were building together. We didn't have a second home to give up, and there was no way I was going to let anyone, let alone family, come in and take over what we had built. I was absolutely dumbfounded that my mother-in-law would even suggest such an idea. What made it worse was the complete lack of consideration for our lives. It wasn't just about offering to help Maya temporarily. My mother-in-law was demanding we change our lives for good. And it wasn't like they were offering to contribute to the mortgage or bills. No, they expected us to foot the entire bill. It felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't help but feel like this was an invasion of our privacy, our peace, and our home. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. This wasn't about family helping each other. It was about entitlement, a demand for support without even considering the strain it would put on us. What was even more frustrating was how my mother-in-law presented it as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She genuinely seemed to think that, because we were childless, it was somehow our responsibility to take care of her daughter's family. At this point, I knew something had to be done. I couldn't just let this slide. But I had to wonder, why was James' family so comfortable making such demands of us? Was this behavior normal to them? How could they not see how wrong it was? When I told James about the conversation with his mother, he was taken aback. He had no idea his mom had even spoken to me about this issue, let alone made such an unreasonable demand. I could tell he was frustrated and confused, which made me even more upset. How could his mother be this manipulative without him knowing? I had expected James to be as outraged as I was, but instead, he was caught off guard by her boldness. As I explained the details to him, it became clear that my mother-in-law had been operating behind his back. She hadn't told him the full extent of the situation. She had only mentioned that Maya was pregnant and needed some help, but she hadn't elaborated on her plan to essentially take over our home. I was angry that James had been kept in the dark about something so important. It made me question how much of his family's manipulative behavior he had been blind to. James promised me that he would speak to his mother directly and get to the bottom of the situation. But as we both reflected on it, we realized that this wasn't just about Maya needing help. It was about his family's constant attempts to control and invade our lives. The more we talked about it, the clearer it became that his family had never respected our boundaries. The whole thing felt like a pattern of emotional manipulation, and it was time to break free from it. This was a pivotal moment for us as a couple. I had never wanted to put Jacob in a position where he had to choose between me and his family, but at that moment, I knew it was unavoidable. Either he stood by me, or we would both be at the mercy of his toxic family. As the tension with James' family grew, so did the strain on our marriage. I could see James torn between his love for me and his desire to maintain peace with his family. We had always been open and supportive of each other, but this situation felt different. It wasn't just a small disagreement, it was a matter of principle. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were pushing the boundaries too far, and James was struggling to balance the expectations of his family with his loyalty to me. The more his family pushed, the more I felt isolated. Every time I voiced my concerns, James would try to smooth things over, but it felt like he wasn't fully comprehending the impact it was having on me. He was too focused on trying to keep the peace, and I was growing frustrated. I wasn't asking for much, just for him to stand up to his family and defend our space. But it was clear that, for most of his life, James had been conditioned to keep things calm at all costs, even at the expense of his own happiness and our relationship. I knew I had to push harder. I couldn't allow my in-laws to walk all over me, and I certainly wasn't willing to sacrifice our home for them. So, I gave James an ultimatum. I told him that if he didn't stand up to his family and put an end to their constant demands, I would not continue this marriage. This wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was the only way I could protect our future together. I had always been the supportive wife, but I couldn't allow myself to be the doormat in this situation. When James finally decided to confront his mother about the situation, it was clear that things had reached a breaking point. I had been anxiously waiting for him to take a stand, but when the moment came, I was proud of how he handled it. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He flat out told his mother that her behavior was unacceptable and that there was no way he was going to allow Maya and her family to move in with us. His mother, however, was not as receptive as I had hoped. Instead of taking accountability for her actions, she tried to justify her behavior by claiming she had acted in Maya's best interest. She argued that Maya needed help, that she was struggling with the pregnancy and the children, and that it was only natural for us to help her out. James wasn't having any of it, and he continued to press her on why she thought it was okay to impose on us like this. My mother-in-law quickly became defensive and tried to backtrack, saying that she never intended to pressure us or make us feel uncomfortable. But it was too late. James had already seen through her manipulative tactics. He reminded her that we were adults, that we were in charge of our own lives, and that no one had the right to tell us what to do with our home. He also pointed out that she had no authority over our financial decisions, and that if she truly cared about Maya's family, she should help them out herself instead of trying to force us into a difficult situation. Despite her attempts to manipulate him emotionally, James stood firm. He told her that he had tried to maintain a relationship with her, even though she had repeatedly disrespected me and undermined our marriage, but that was no longer acceptable. He made it clear that his priority was his wife and our home, And if she couldn't respect that, then their relationship would suffer. It was an emotional confrontation, and I could hear his mother's voice trembling as she tried to get him to change his mind. But James didn't waver. For the first time, I saw him truly stand up to his family. He wasn't just protecting me, but he was protecting our future together. I was so relieved that he had finally recognized how toxic his family was and was willing to distance himself from them. After the conversation, he didn't hesitate to set boundaries. He told her he would not be speaking to her until she understood the importance of respecting our decisions. It was a huge step forward for Jacob, and I felt like we were finally on the same page. As expected, the fallout from James' confrontation with his mother was intense. My mother-in-law, who had always been the dominant figure in their family, was furious. She couldn't believe that her own son would refuse to help Maya and her family, and she lashed out in anger. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about control. She wanted James to submit to her wishes, just as he had done in the past, but he wasn't backing down. Shortly after, Maya called me, and I could hear the fury in her voice. She was livid that I had allowed James to stand up to her mother's wishes, and that we were refusing to support her family. She called me every name in the book, accusing me of being selfish, cruel, and heartless. She didn't care about the sacrifices we had made, or how unreasonable her request was. She just wanted to blame me for breaking up their family dynamic. I didn't take her insults lying down. I reminded her that it wasn't my fault her family was struggling, and that I wasn't going to sacrifice my life and my home for them. I also pointed out that her husband wasn't contributing anything, and that if anyone was being selfish, it was her and her husband, who expected others to take care of them. When I mentioned that if she wanted to talk about selfishness, she should take a good look at her own relationship, she was temporarily stunned into silence. It was clear that she had no idea how to respond to my directness. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were clearly furious, and I expected them to try and manipulate the situation further, but I was done tolerating their toxicity. I told Maya that there was no way I was going to allow them into our home unless they were prepared to contribute financially and help with the mortgage. This wasn't about being heartless. It was about boundaries and respect. They didn't deserve to just waltz into our lives and take over. Despite the harsh words and the emotional chaos, I felt relieved. It was a relief to finally take control of my life and my home and stand up for myself. James' frustration with his family grew as he realized just how entitled they had become. They expected us to take care of them without any consideration for our own lives. His mother had always been this way, but it wasn't until this situation that James truly understood the depth of her manipulation. He had always tried to maintain a positive relationship with them, but now he saw that no matter how much he gave, it was never enough for them. The more he reflected on his family's behavior, the angrier he became. He was no longer willing to accept the way they treated us. He realized that they had been undermining him for years, making him feel guilty for not doing enough for them, all while taking advantage of his generosity. James had always been the kind of person who wanted to avoid conflict, but when it came to protecting our home and our future, he finally realized that conflict was necessary. He began to see how unhealthy the dynamics were with his family. It wasn't just about his mother and sister. It was a pattern of manipulation and entitlement that had been going on for years. James realized that he had been enabling their behavior, and that in order to protect our relationship and our lives, he needed to cut ties with them. After much reflection, James came to the ultimate decision. He needed to cut ties with his mother and sister for good. He was no longer willing to tolerate their toxic behavior and emotional manipulation. He had tried for years to please them, to make things work, but he now realized that his family's behavior was unhealthy and damaging. It wasn't just about Maya and her family. It was about the years of emotional abuse, guilt-tripping, and manipulation they had subjected him to. James had always been a kind and patient person, but he knew that he needed to prioritize our marriage and our home. He couldn't let his family continue to control our lives. This was a difficult decision for him, but he knew it was the right one. He was ready to sever ties and move forward without their constant interference. I supported his decision wholeheartedly. It wasn't easy for either of us, but I knew it was necessary for the sake of our happiness and peace. James was finally standing up for himself, and I couldn't have been prouder of him. We had been through so much together, and this was the moment when he fully embraced the importance of protecting our relationship. Despite James' decision to cut ties with his family, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law weren't ready to give up just yet. They showed up at our door, demanding to speak to James and resolve the situation. I wasn't surprised. They were used to getting their way, and they weren't going to back down without a fight. But this time, it was different. I had installed security cameras around our house, anticipating that they might try something like this. When they showed up, I called James immediately, who was on his way. I answered the door, and there they were, both of them, furious and demanding that we let them in. I refused, and they began their tirade. My mother-in-law accused me of being selfish and cruel, while Maya called me a gold digger and blamed me for everything. I didn't flinch. I reminded them that everything they said was being recorded, and I would use the footage if necessary to obtain a restraining order. This was a turning point for me. I had reached a level of confidence that I hadn't had before, and I wasn't backing down. When James arrived, he was calm but firm. He asked them why they were at our house, and they tried to justify their actions. But James wasn't having it. He made it clear that if they didn't leave, he would call the police. They were shocked by his reaction, but he didn't care. He had finally taken control of his life. In the aftermath of that confrontation, things were quiet. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law left our property and haven't attempted to contact us since. James has now realized just how toxic his family was, and we're both relieved that we took this stand. It wasn't an easy road, but I'm proud of how far we've come as a couple. We've been able to move on with our lives, free from the constant pressure and manipulation of James' family. Our home feels like ours again, and I'm looking forward to the future with James. We've learned valuable lessons about boundaries, respect, and standing up for what's right. It's been a difficult journey, but we're stronger for it. I'm ready to leave the past behind and focus on the future. With James' support and our bond stronger than ever, we're building the life we always dreamed of, free from the toxicity that once threatened to tear us apart. Finally, I just say don't interfere in anyone's life. Everyone want to spend their life as he want, so everyone have right to enjoy his life. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed my channel yet, please do so and press the notification bell. This way, you'll stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.